You're not responsible. It was wrong. Reach out to me. We'll connect you.
I will never see, speak, or hear from Aaron Smith-Levin for the rest of my life.
I've been raised since the age of 4 to follow orders, do as I was told, or risk losing everything.
If we speak out, that's the only way they're going to get the strength to have the courage to do the same.
Why the hell does someone have to escape to get out of a religion?
I'm still shocked by the evil. This is pure evil at work.
Children or not children? We will talk about that for a second. But welcome to Come Get Some Extra Scientology edition. Today I've got Len Zinberg, and as I said before, when I saw him on Scientology in the Aftermath special on Memorial Day, I saw a lot of humanity come out of this, man. And I said, I got to have this guy on because this is a true story of redemption. And I think we've all had that time, even if you're not in Scientology, just in just regular life with people, in relationships and everything else. We've all just embarrassing moments in our lives. We've all done things we regret, wish we could take back, and think we can never be redeemed from or whatever. But this is a true story of redemption. And if they can come back from this, and Len's a really great guy, any of us can come back from anything. Just something to think about in a positive light. I put that last part in there about children not being children, about the rape culture, because it sticks with me for many reasons. One of them is that children are not children really, really stands out. That is in the very writings of Scientology, and big people, small bodies, big Satan, small body, and I've been seeing a lot lately about how children as young as 8. I even saw Melissa Paris say something recently, and I've seen Fiona, this woman in Ireland who's been really doing a lot of good work to expose Scientology and what they do to children. Children as young as 8 getting the purification rundown, 5,000 milligrams of niacin in the hot box there. Wow, she recorded a call that I got to hear, and I'll see if I can post it a little bit later. Where she's talking to a representative who's like, well, we try not to do children too young, but, if they're in a Scientology family and an 8-year-old kid wants to get the purification right now, and you really can't tell them no. And I'm like, what? Yes, you can. So there's really, it's really scary. It's really scary. And she's also revealing something where I think I've seen a lot about it recently, where they're treating autism with chiropractic adjustments. Really? I'm an adult. I can tell you, man, chiropractic adjustments don't work for me. They make me hurt. So I'm not even interested in that, let alone putting a child through those bone cracking maneuvers. So really concerned about that. I do, the way this show is wired, I don't know if I can really focus 100% on second generation and children, but I do want to put more emphasis on it, because this is really serious shit. And this is really a big deal. Second generation don't have a choice, and children definitely don't have a choice, especially when their parents are pushing them in that direction. So if you thought Scientology was something that was just bad 10, 20 years ago for children and families, and it's not that bad anymore, I got news for you. I think it might be getting worse to an extent. And that's why I do what I do, and why people speak out, and why maybe you should do what you can too to speak out. But right now, let's go ahead and let's get into the interview with Len Zinberg. Okay, today my guest, Scientology in the Aftermath special on Memorial Day, Merchants of Fear. He was a member of the Guardian's office, what also originally was, I guess you could say, a spy organization within Scientology. And he has redeemed himself, and we'll talk all about his story here today. It's Len Zinberg. Did I say your name right, Len?
Yes, you did. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
It's good to be with you. But I have to correct you on one fact.
Sure.
I was never a member of the Guardian's office.
Volunteer?
I was a staff member at the New York org, and I was in the Sea Org at FOLO in New York. the
Okay.
Flag Operations Liaison Office, and I was being piloted out of the Sea Org by the assistant guardian in New York, whose name was Mike McGee. I guess it was around 1975. He was trying to move me out of the Sea Org into the guardian's office. And, but yes, my activities during my time in Scientology was what's called the Guardian's Activities Staff, GAS. And they're basically people who are trusted, who were sufficiently brainwashed, who are trusted to do, infiltration and spying and all of the really dirty and sometimes unlawful activities in Scientology.
Okay, and I think it's important, and I know most of your articles, most of your interviews you've done have started with this, and I usually try to make it a little bit original on my show, but it's really important to your story, so I kind of want to go back, if you could, and talk about when you were 13.
When I was 13?
Yeah, you were 13. I believe you went to Auschwitz. Is that right? Am I saying that right?
No. When I was 13, my parents sent me to Israel for my bar mitzvah. And while there, I visited a place that had opened, I think maybe 4 or 5 years earlier, called Yad Vashem, which is a memorial and museum to the victims of the Holocaust. And it was a very powerful, formative experience that I had. And when I look at my involvement in Scientology 10 years later, less than 10 years actually, and my own persecution of a Holocaust survivor, it gives me, I think, a perspective on the way that I allowed Scientology to alter my moral compass. And that really is what becoming a Scientologist involves. It involves learning about Scientology ethics, which is one of the 3 pillars of Scientology. There's the ethics, the tech, and the admin. And the ethics basically involves indoctrinating the person to the point where they believe that Scientology is the entire focus, or should be the entire focus of their lives, and that it's the most important thing, and for many people it becomes an all-consuming thing, and that's what it became in my case.
Okay, and that's why I think it was important, because you were kind of at a vulnerable early age at 13, and it's almost like your moral compass was built there, but then things started to change as you got into Scientology. What was it that drew you to Scientology?
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, I was a Jewish kid from Brooklyn who, at the age of 21, was introduced to Scientology by a trusted family member and the friend of a family member, and that was in 1968. So what drew me to it was the promise of increased awareness and mental stability, and ultimately it was the whole promise of the upper levels of Scientology, the ability to operate independently of matter, energy, space, and time, and to basically be a superhuman, which is what OT promises. But Scientologists find out much too late that it doesn't deliver on the promise.
So this isn't something that you look at as an idealism. This is something you think is going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a grade chart, and the people in 1968 who came into Scientology would look at the top of that grade chart and all of the abilities, being able to have full perception outside one's body, all the miraculous states of being. And because Hubbard very matter-of-factly promised that, Dianetics was comparable to the invention of the wheel, or the discovery of fire. He was very modest in his self-assessment. He claimed to have done all of this research, which we eventually find out, basically, his research consisted of pulling thoughts out of drug-induced episodes where he was taking pinks and grays, amphetamines and barbiturates. So, there's the lure of Scientology is in the promises and in the very certain way that Hubbard and Scientologists present the subject. And unfortunately, back in 1968, before the internet, there was very little to counter it.
And you're drawn to it, right? If you're not sure about organized religion, this is something new and amazing that you really want to check into.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, so you were on staff and you said you were in Sea Org. How did they come to decide they wanted to use you with the Guardian's office? I know you didn't join the Guardian's office, but they were using you as the Guardian's. What was the acronym you gave?
GAS. It's Guardian Activity Staff.
Activity Staff.
It's sort of like being an FSM, a field staff member for the Guardian's office. It's a volunteer, but I know Tori was doing that. There are a number of people who've spoken about their activities volunteering for the Guardian's office. Tori Bazazian, Roy Magoo. The way it began was my father worked for the Internal Revenue Service, and when I became involved in Scientology, he tried to explain to me that Hubbard was benefiting from the millions of dollars that Scientology was raking in. And I was sufficiently indoctrinated to believing Scientology at that time that I disbelieved my father. And my father would show me these things from the IRS that explained that Hubbard was adjudicated to have inured. In other words, he had received proceeds from Scientology. And I thought, well, this can't be right. I've got to help Scientology to straighten this out. And so I would take these documents from my father and bring them to the Guardian's office in New York, where they were received. And
wow.
So my first activity was basically unsolicited, and that was I thought I was doing the ethical thing, and I think most Scientologists would understand that.
Right.
After that, what happened was I was living in Brooklyn with a girl. I think Tony Ortega pretty much detailed my involvement in his book, The Unbreakable Miss Lovely. I was living in Brooklyn, and this girl who I was living with had been involved in an activity where the Guardian's office had placed an ad in the Village Voice that purported to be from a researcher who was compiling critical information about Scientology, who was soliciting people who had information critical of Scientology. And it was explained to me by Jeff Marino, who would later become a very prominent figure in Guardian's office history. But Jeff explained to me that since I was going to be living with this girl and that they had listed her telephone number in the ad that they placed in the Village Voice, that I should make sure when I answered the phone not to sound like a Scientologist. In other words, don't acknowledge them, because Scientologists who are kind of new tend to be somewhat robotic.
Okay.
So that was the advice that I was given. I was just to take the person's name and phone number. And as Tony details in The Unbreakable Miss Lovely, the people that were the targets of this were Paulette Cooper and Robert Kaufman. And that was who Jeff Marino in the Guardian's office was interested in basically getting their hooks into.
Okay, I want to go back a step here. Did you, at some point, in some way, consider your father an enemy?
I didn't, because I didn't want to ever have to disconnect from him. So when I was questioned about his level of antagonism, I always told them, no, my father respects what I'm doing. He tells me this, and after a while I just said, he's not saying anything. And in truth, he wasn't. I mean, my parents had basically given up on being able to persuade me. They saw that I had basically been captured by Scientology. So I didn't view him as an enemy. I viewed the IRS as a totally suppressive organization, which is what Scientologists believe 100%. IRS, psychiatry, and the world bankers, whether they were
the world bankers,
real enemies of mankind. Yeah.
So when you see these things that your father's showing you, you're just thinking he knows not what he says. You basically think he doesn't realize what he's doing.
Yeah. Yes, because Hubbard was the paragon of truth and wisdom, and Hubbard said that he didn't benefit from any of the funds that we paid. There was this piece that he wrote called "What Your Fees Buy," and he basically says, I'm one of you guys. I'm living just like you are.
Right.
I get royalties from my books, but what your fees buy are your fees go into the organization. And at the time you're in the organization, you realize, gee, if my fees are putting the organization there, how come the organization never has any toilet paper?
You think they could put some, huh? All right. So they got you. They're trying to track Paulette Cooper. That's the name everybody's going to recognize, of course. Paulette Cooper and this is it Kaufman, right? Robert Kaufman.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are they telling you about these guys? How do they convince you that these are people you really need to go after and target here?
Well, Kathy Savas, who was in the Guardian's office in New York, told me that Paulette Cooper was falsely claiming to have been a Holocaust survivor, that she looked like a witch, and that she was a thoroughly evil person. And every time I would go into the Guardian's office, there was I don't know how to convey this so that you'll really understand it, but there was a very singular focus on destroying her. She was viewed as the, literally, this the embodiment of evil. That because she was trying to, destroy mankind's only hope for salvation. That's how I looked at it, and that's how Scientologists looked at it. And it wasn't the way you just characterized it. That they wanted to. What was it that you said?
What was it that they told you that made it? I don't remember what I said. It was something like that they had to be, that they were so bad or so evil or had to be destroyed.
Yeah, it wasn't that they were just trying to get information on her. There was a very, very devoted organization to her destruction, and that could have been accomplished any one of different ways. Had she taken her own life, had she been institutionalized, had she been convicted of a crime, any of those would have suited Scientology at the time. And this was because she committed the crime of writing a book.
Did they ever tell you about the book?
Often, yeah, I saw the book in the Guardian's office. They had all of the books by critics, which at that time there were very few.
Okay.
Very few. Paulette's was one of the first. It's interesting. I compare my own behavior to that of an Al-Qaeda member. And when you look at the comparison between, for instance, what the Ayatollah Khomeini did when Salman Rushdie published the Satanic Verses by issuing a fatwa which basically sanctioned his murder. Essentially, that was the same thing that Hubbard did years before the Iranian Revolution in '79. It was basically the same idea. You've written a book, and I'm so offended by the book that you must be destroyed. It's sheer insanity. And I was taken in by it. I accepted it. I was a true believer.
Did you ever read the book? Did you ever look through the pages?
I've read the book. It's online.
Well, I meant when you were in.
Oh no. That wouldn't be done. First of all, Scientology had stolen all the copies out of the libraries. The book was very, very hard to obtain.
Right.
And secondly, no Scientologist would subject themselves to that. That's called in theta, interbulated theta. No Scientologist would read a book critical of Scientology.
So that's like when gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Tom Cruise, not Tom Cruise, but John Travolta. Sorry. How could I draw a blank on John Travolta? When John Travolta's asked modern day.
Should I?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yes. Why should I see going clear? For me, Scientology is wonderful. In other words, within the confines of John Travolta's experience and belief, there's absolutely no reason to question it.
That's disturbing, but that's very real. Very, very real.
It is. It's frightening.
So when you're doing these operations, you yourself have watched Paulette Cooper's door. you actually did have some personal involvement in these attempts to ruin Paulette Cooper.
Yes, I did. One of them involved surveilling her. She lived in a high-rise apartment building called the Churchill on 2nd Avenue around, I think, 40th Street. And there was a restaurant across the street from the entrance to her building. And Scientology had people surveilling her in shifts. And so I would go there at, 6 o'clock, and I would relieve the person who was there. They'd leave, and I'd be there for 4 or 5 hours, and then someone would come and relieve me. When I talk about the real singular focus that Scientology had to destroy her, and it continues today, but possibly not to the same degree, or possibly because of the fact that there are so many people speaking out now that Scientology just isn't capable of the manpower to harass them all. Mm-hmm. But at that time, she was really the utter focus of their attention.
Wow, and that's like full court right there. You said before, like, if she would have gone to prison, if she would have committed suicide, these things would have been acceptable. Was that ever verbalized? Like, well, if she commits suicide, she commits suicide. Was that something you heard?
It was widely known. I'm trying to think if there was a specific instance where I heard it. I think in some of the documents that the FBI recovered in the 1977 raid, that was articulated, but there's absolutely no question that was the purpose. I mean, there were actual programs with, step A, B, C, D, have someone do this and then have someone do that. It was a very, very well organized and well funded campaign to destroy her. Of that there's absolutely no question.
Okay, so you were asked.
I mean, it may sound.
Go ahead.
It may sound as if I'm exaggerating the extent to which Scientology went, but I'm not.
Well, then, since covering this subject and talking to people off air, like, I've had a lot of conversations now and gotten to know some people, I often find out what we hear on television. Like I said earlier, I think it was off air we talked. I said earlier about how, and I said it with Leah Remini, people know it's bad, but they don't know it's that bad. And I often find what you hear and see on television that you think is sensationalized as far as this subject is concerned, it's more than often worse than you've heard.
Yeah. So
I get it.
Unfortunately, that's very true. Scientology is worse than people think it is.
And what I want to know is, at this point, you were asked to gather papers or pages of Paulette's diary?
I was given pages of her diary, and I was told to bring them up to the offices of her father. I was given his address in Midtown Manhattan, and I was told to dress like a street person so that I couldn't be, I guess, described as a Scientologist. I was told to mispronounce the name of Paulette's father, and I was told to just leave them at the receptionist's desk, say, these are for Mr. Cooper, and then leave. And two other things I was told. One was that if for some reason I should be arrested, I would be provided with a lawyer. And the other thing I was told was that if somebody tried to stop me, to just, knock them over and get the hell out. And,
wow.
That was essentially the extent of it. It was a very specific, compartmentalized activity. Yeah.
So, did you know these were pages of her diary with embarrassing content, or was that not even something you needed to know?
I didn't know that they were her diary, but I was told not to look in the envelope. I did look, and I saw that it was photocopies of handwritten pages that appeared to be written by a woman. I really did not at the time know what the purpose of my delivering these papers was. As I said, it was very compartmentalized, and that's how the Guardian's office and OSA operate.
I want people to realize, and because a lot of people think that Scientology was roses in pixie dust before David Miscavige. This is all under L. Ron Hubbard.
Yes, this was all under L. Ron Hubbard. This was in the early 70s.
Okay. So, what happens next for you? Because that, for me, is kind of where the story kind of takes a drop off, because I think that's... are you still involved in this? How far does it go? At what point are you away from the Guardian's office? At what point are you... do you wake up to what's happening here? What happens next?
Well, during that time, I was a staff member at the New York organization. I was an auditor. I was in charge of training field staff members who were basically commissioned Scientology salesmen. I was actually the chaplain of the church. I took a 5-hour course, and I was given a card that stated that I was a Scientology minister, and I was sent to a clothing provider who was adjacent to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and I bought he was a nice Jewish boy. I'm buying a clerical garb of a priest. And then on Sundays, I would conduct Sunday service. And I would read, all of this stuff that I, at a certain level, knew Scientology was doing the exact opposite of. And, once that bamboozle sets in, it's very, very hard to let go of it, One thing I want to read to you is a quote from Carl Sagan, which I think perfectly describes Scientology. And I don't know whether Sagan was discussing Scientology. Probably not, but he wrote this. He wrote, "One of the saddest lessons of history is this. If we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of a bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back."
Wow, that's pretty deep and true. Nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to be wrong, especially when you commit so much to it.
That's right. You commit money. You commit from 9 in the morning until 10 at night. You're committing your life's energy to it, and it, the self-reinforcing aspect of that makes it very, very difficult for people to leave.
Okay, so that's Len Zinberg part 1. Part 2 will be next week. It's not over yet. We'll get more into how he came to leave, some of the realizations Len had, some of the return to his moral standard and values, returning to his thought process as a 13-year-old boy at that museum. Just really, really deep, really great guy. Really great insight coming up in part 2 for more of coming out of it and getting around to the fact that he knew what he did, and he could have just let it go, but he didn't. And you'll hear more about that next week, as well as 10 questions. I also want to tell you I've had the distinct honor of speaking to a Facebook friend of mine, Glenda Smith, for a future episode in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, you'll hear from Glenda. She was on staff in Scientology, and she also spent a good amount of time with the CCHR. And that's going to be really interesting stuff you need to hear. And I'm really, really stoked about it. I love Glenda. I think you will too. Awesome lady. Just like with Len Zinberg and some of the other guests I've had, I talked to Glenda a little bit off air before and after the interview, and just both of these people, wonderful people, and everybody I've talked to on this show. So real people, and if you don't get to talk to these people outside of listening to them on TV or a podcast or an article, you don't. Maybe you still don't know these people are for real, and they've been through what they've been through. It's happening now to somebody. Just to keep that in mind. Anyway, until next week, I don't know what I'm doing Thursday. Of course, Friday next week, part 2, Len Zinberg. Until then, that about sums it up. Stay connected, everybody. Have a good week.
You have been listening to Come Get Some Extra on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, YouTube, and many other streaming services where available. As always, stay connected, and that about sums it up.